Hello, you've just caught me having a drink in my DIY garden shed. Well, actually it's not really mine. This week I'm going to show you how I built a charity tea shed for my local kids football club, because unfortunately due to lockdown, or during lockdown, they've had lots of devastations, people breaking in, arson attacks, lost everything. So this week I'm going to show you how I helped out by building this tea shed. Everything will be time-stamped and you'll find a free set of plans in a link below. Keep on watching. Okay, so firstly you might be wondering who covered the cost of materials, and that was my uncle in America after he'd seen the football club's pleas and fundraisers online. And yes, this is also the birthplace of the former England football manager Kevin Keegan. Enough of the name dropping, I was also kindly gifted a few products to get the job done as well, and test them on the job, like these heavy duty sawhorses from Tough Built. But can they hold up to building a shed on them, including my weight? Well, you can see for yourself. Oh, and by the way, nothing in this video is paid. I don't have to say anything nice, but you will find affiliate links below to everything I'm using. Also, one of the things that I really love about these is that they fold away easily and you can adjust the heights. These have a max capacity of £1,300 each, and the notches are designed for 90 to 45mm structural timber, although we didn't have any to hand, so I placed smaller ones in and made them tight by hammering in wedges. And I've now got my actual spars for the shed base. The two longest ones are together, so I can measure and mark the spars at the same time. Then pre-drilled holes ready to screw the spars in between them. I'll also be trialling Tough Built's Clip Tech tool belt on the job for the first time here. You can buy them in a set with larger pouches, but I found them too big for me. So I ended up going to Toolstation that morning and buying smaller things like a foam pouch, drill holster and a hammer hook. And you can also buy wall or van organiser strips, which I think I'll probably get from a workshop and hang them up when I'm not using them. But before I screwed the spars together, I checked each one to see if any were bowing. If they were, I kept the bow side up. The next job is to make sure the base is square. When I'm dealing with larger things like this, I prefer to get a spare pair of hands because it can be difficult with a tape measure collapsing on you, but I'll show you a new product later that gets around that. If it is square, each measurement should be identical while checking diagonally. It also helps to temporarily toenail one side down so it doesn't move all over the place while you're trying to correct it. And once you're happy, you can toenail the other sides too. Another thing you can do to keep it square is cut some mitered offcuts and nail them in the corners. Then a quick change of outfit because I didn't want to stain my new clothes with wood preservative, although I found dark jeans do help. Once dried, I started cladding with tongue and groove using a nail gun. Although as much as I thought the visor attachment for my ear defenders looked cool, it kept steaming up, so later I removed those for goggles. Now getting back to the tongue and groove, you may have noticed this year that wood has massively gone up in price, or there's a few things that are hard to get hold of right now. So I spent a lot of time throughout this whole project sorting out the good and the bad pieces, like holding damaged pieces back for things like ends where I could trim cracks and stuff off. And I went over any protruding bits with a flush trim router bit. So this is my fourth ever shed that I've built, and I learn something new every time. One of the things is how to plan your shed's flashings, also known as corner trims that I've talked about before. Mine will be going on the front this time, and that's the side the serving hatch is on. So in this case, the panels that will be slightly longer than the base itself are the two shorter sides. And they're slightly longer because you want to give yourself a little bit of allowance when you get the whole shed square on the base when you finally put it together. A quick way to work it out is to draw on the corners of the base using offcuts of the same framework you'll be using. I can then hold my first framework piece in line with one of those marks. This is the front one in front of me. Then mark where to cut it in line with my pencil line. And I'll need 4 of those, 2 top and bottom lengths for the front and 2 for the back. Let's make those 2 panels first, starting with the shortest back that won't have a door, window or hatch. First I toenailed a piece to the corner of the base. It does help to sit on it or clamp it down while hammering it so it doesn't move. Then evenly mark where the spars will go on the first one. Then I can butt the other piece up to it and transfer the same marks. That saves me measuring everything twice. Then separate them to lay out all the spars in between again, just like I did with the base earlier, and pre-drilled and screwed those together. And because I'm lining up the sides to the base that's already square, I don't need to keep awkwardly checking with a tape measure on every panel. Let's repeat the same for the front, copying that back panel, but this time it'll be taller to create a slope. I didn't add the same 2 middle spars here initially though, as I needed to screw 2 horizontal lengths for the serving hatch first. Then cut and screw the middle ones in, including noggins towards the top. Okay, right now we have 2 different heights of panels for the front and the back. So for the next 2 panels, these aren't as wide, but this one will have a door. So I'll mark spar marks on 2 pieces, but these ones are going to be heavy duty CLS to make it stronger for the opening. But they're also much longer to give me access to cutter slope shortly. The top spar that I marked is then also drilled and screwed in the middle of the spars to temporarily keep them in position while I worked out my slope. So I can transfer the shortest panel on that and the highest point on the other end. Then I could use another piece of framework, position it on the inside of that mark and treat it as a straight edge to draw inside it. And those are the lines I need to cut with a handsaw. And we'll cut those overhangs in line with the uprights in a sec. And once I'd unscrewed the middle bit, I then took it back to the bottom of the next spar, it's already got marks on it, toe-nailed that. But let's quickly finish the shed's door opening, which has screwed another horizontal top piece. My dad also asked me to screw a couple of noggins on this one, which will help people lift the panels when taking it on site. Now it's just a matter of copying the pent roof slope on the final side panel, but this time with spars throughout. However, don't you find there's always an however moment in my videos? The design of the shed changed before I returned the next day, and that was this panel was now going to have a glass window. I didn't notice the lads had changed it down the yard before I got there until halfway through cladding it, although my free garden bar plans do reflect this change. Anyway, I'm cladding tongue and groove to the spars again, but this time starting with an overhang as a skirting around the base. And you'll have to make sure that overhang matches on all of the panels and doors. But with price increases and shortages, I continue to spend a long time sorting through the best panels to prevent waste. Again, saving the bad pieces where defects could be ripped off for things like trims. Some were slightly warped too, meaning I'd have to clamp them together as I went. It was a bit tedious, but we got there. Or occasionally the tongues were swollen and I had to hand plane them for a better fit. It's all an experience. When I got to the window opening, I'd continue with shorter pieces either side until I got to above it where I'd need a full piece. I nailed smaller offcuts for the top slope before hand sawing and making protruding bits flush with a flush trim router bit. Once I've finished the first cladded panel, those toenails are then removed and dismantle my stack of panels as I go. And I'm now reunited with a panel that has the door, exactly the same process, make sure the overhang is the same to match the rest, and continue until everything's cladded.
Then it allowed me to finally get to the bottom of the base and finish treating it. I don't know about you, but one of my favourite parts of building a shed is screwing all the side panels together and temporarily on the base so you can get a visual and see your hard efforts taking shape. I could then work on areas like the flashings, those corner trims I mentioned earlier. Although the door frames trims have to have notches cut out at the bottom so they can mould around the bottom frame. Trims on the window, which I'll talk more about in a minute, and the serving hatch. And to sacrifice continuity, there's a lot of that in this video, I'm going to fast forward to show you how I made the shed door. The easiest way I've found to measure the width is first temporarily nail the door's two side trims to one of them that you've nailed on the opening. Then measure the gap left between that, and I'm deducting 12mm for a clearance. Often you've seen me do 15, but we'll be using flush hinges on this one. I also stacked my top and bottom door frame on the shed panel's bottom frame, measured that gap and deducted 20mm. Once those were cut to size, I started screwing the whole framework together. And marked evenly for my horizontal lengths, which again I use more structural timber. So remember in my DIY bike shed video when I showed you how I screwed a large block inside the frame and made holes with an auger drill bit for a 5-lever lock? Another video link below. Well, this time, after screwing the door trim on, making sure I keep away from the lock area, I drew around the lock's position and took it to my dad's mortise and tenon machine and pressed away. This also had to be checked for square, then used an offcut for a brace, which is angled down towards the hinge side to prevent sagging. To clad the door though, this time I'm running vertically with the same tongue and groove, and the cut down to a length that matches the rest of the cladding's overhang. Although I forgot to hit record, but I'd started with nailing the first piece against the first trim, ensuring all panels were flush at the top, and also ensured I'd nailed it to the brace. I couldn't get to the other side, so I spun it around and nailed my last smallest piece on, door trim, and hand sawed the bottom notches out. For hinges, you could use stylish ones and screw them on the outside of the door, but that requires bolts for security. This time I'm screwing 3 flush hinges on that don't require any chiselling. But before I screw the door on, I nailed another piece above the door opening. After it was all magically stained by some pixies, my dad held the door up while I screwed the hinges on. But a quick tip, don't put all of the screws in initially, because then you can check to see if it opens and closes properly. Otherwise, if you have to move it over a millimetre or two, then you've then got weaker screw holes. Then you can screw the rest in once you're happy. For the 5-lever lock and handle, I'm going to go slightly further in time again, where I had to unscrew it to turn the latch around. I've got another video on that as well, if you buy one of those cheaper ones. But with this not being my favourite job, and I've already shown you this in a lot of detail before, I'm going to cheekily speed through the footage and leave you a link to that below, otherwise I'm going to die of boredom. Instead, let's go to the glass window that I fitted for the first time. But of course, this is optional, but it's nice to let some light in. First, I nailed a frame together using timber that wasn't as thick as the shed's framework, so that allowed a recess for the glass to sit behind. Then slotted it into the shed, flush with the tongue and groove, and nail gunned the top and bottom. For For the thicker sides, I pre-drilled and screwed to the framework. I then ran to the back of it, ran clear silicone all the way around and in the middle, which would act as a seal and adhesive for the obscure glass panel to go on. But to keep costs down, I recommend sourcing the glass panel first, then building your framework around that. Then I cut and positioned some trim to secure it while my dad carefully nailed it to the framework because, well, I just didn't want to be responsible for accidentally breaking it when this was the only piece that we had. Next, let's go back to the serving hatch. I'd stacked 4 pieces of timber on top of each other to work out my next cuts, again with some hinge clearances, as I'll be building 2 doors for it. I worked out the centre point of each longest length and screwed 2 frames up. And more tongue and groove to match the rest of the shed. For the hinges, I positioned and screwed heavy duty brass ones on the bottom of the serving hatch and my dad held it in place while I screwed it to the shed and checked to see if it opened and closed okay. But before I screw on the rest, I'd also like to say a massive thank you to Stanley for kindly topping up some of my dad's favourite tools during the middle of this community build. You've probably noticed by now, the Stanley Fatmax is the only drill he uses, and that they're well used. And you'll find a whole range of Stanley tools here, that vintage hand plane that's over 60 years old, and I didn't even know that their Boss Stitch nail gun was their sister brand. So I got to test their upgraded V20 range, like their drill, which is also brushless, and it's got an increased BPM, longer battery life, and a battery indicator. I found the new one's also a little bit lighter and smoother to hold. Although one thing I must point out though, the batteries aren't interchangeable with the old and the new. So let's try them out on the rest of the hinges. I also had a spare pair of hands prop up the top serving hatch while I finished it off. But before the roof went on, I positioned a spar on the top side panel, just inside one of the flashings, then marked on the other side just before that flashing started as well. Then cut 2 to exactly the same length as this and drilled and screwed directly on top of each one. Now to start making the roof's framework. I have another spar longer than the width of the shed, and I've marked it 100mm in and positioned that mark where the shed starts. So keep it still, mark where you see the spars on the back panel, but by the time you get to the end, make a mark where the shed finishes and another 100mm mark after that, and it's that last line that you need to cut down. And repeat again with the second piece. So exactly like we've done before, take those to a workbench, but I'm screwing much longer spars this time because I needed to create more shelter so customers didn't get rained on while they bought drinks. So the end pieces will actually have 2 close together. And I tell you what's nice, using Stanley's heavy duty tape measure and not needing to ask for help to hook it onto the opposite corner to check to see if it's square. I liked how these held the shape. And more toe nailing to keep it that way, and time to start cladding it. Now another trick that you can do if you're short of wood and you're only working with offcuts, although you need to do some planning with it, is have your strips joining smack bang in the middle of the spars. So no one can tell from inside that it's patched together. But with it being a bit more time consuming, it ended up being a teamwork task while someone did some of the cuts and I stayed on the roof nailing them all on. And I really put my tough built gel knee pads to work. And to save a bit of time, I left some protruding ends and again trimmed them off with the router within seconds. Let's skip forward where the roof is now temporarily on, and I nailed a stopper piece at the back and cladded where the remaining spars were visible. Next, to work on how they're going to close and lock the serving hatch from the inside. I screwed on 4 pad bolts either side of the shed's serving hatch doors. And a cover piece screwed on the top hatch's door to cover the gap where the two meet. And when it came to ways to keep the top serving hatch open and the bottom one to only drop by 90 degrees, I had one of those rare moments where it paid to not throw all the odds and ends away in my workshop organisation video a few months back. I used a Works cordless angle grinder to cut a spare stainless steel chain that I found and screwed one each to the sides and the bottom bolts. I also found this catch in my stash, thinking it would be useful one day, and it was, and I screwed that with a couple of washers behind it to the top of the roof where I could twist it, keep it up there, untwist it and drop down the door. Then for a plywood handle for something to grab while opening and closing that upper one. Although I did realise it was best to unscrew the chains so I could line the table section of the hatch with plywood and reattach it back on. And this is where I really had fun with Stanley's finishing nailer. I'll be honest, I did keep one of these for myself as it was so cool and I think it'll be really handy.
Tee up! Oh no.
Shouting tee up down the yard never grows old. And a bit of hand sanding on the sharp edges so nobody gets splinters. About a week later, when it came to taking the shed to the football club's training ground and building it on their concrete base, the original plan was to felt the roof while we were there, because sometimes it can make it really heavy. But the lads ended up doing it while I wasn't there, which is really why I filmed a similar one the other week with a few tips, so I'll leave a link to that video below. Anyway, while someone's holding up each panel and push bolts through drilled holes, I'm tightening them from the inside. And after making sure it's square on top of the base, I've then screwed the panels down. Next, the roof goes on, and I'm screwing it all the way around from the inside. The club also asked for some shelves, and my dad always has a stash of plywood corner pieces, and I love the simplicity of it. I'd already screwed some studs to the top edge, offset by the depth of the spars, pushed them against the wall, screwed them in, and a few along the back with a big corner one for their tea urn. Then I'm screwing some glossy melamine panels from underneath.
I christened it with the first drink in here.
Something I didn't get on film though is that behind all the doors I screwed stop lats on. These are just to stop doors and things being pushed in and damaging the hinges.
Tee up!
I'm easily entertained. So there you go. A community tea shed, snack shack, call it what you will, or a DIY garden bar if you want to make one yourself using my free plans below. And it was an absolute pleasure to be able to help kids out where I grew up, and hopefully they won't have any more bad luck. Oh, hello. You've just caught me drinking in my new... Oh, hello. You've just caught me drinking in my... You've just caught me drinking in my new... my local kids football club because I'd lost all of the... No. Done. I've had enough. I'm going on.